What do we do when an author of children's books turns out to be a creep? I've been keeping an eye on the accusations against Neil Gaiman for some time. He's been accused of some very horrific behavior toward women, and the story's breaking open this week due to an in-depth report by New York Magazine. I've held off on saying anything about this situation until now, although I have been watching it for some time. It's important not to just jump in when accusations are made. You have to wait until there's a point where enough information has come out that you can start to make a judgment. It's hard to know exactly where that moment is, but I feel like we've reached it in this case. I also have a slightly more selfish reason for not speaking out until now, and that's that Neil Gaiman has a lot of fans, and some of them, their enjoyment of his work goes well beyond that, and they kind of worship the man himself. They really don't like it when someone has something critical to say about him, and they can be very vicious toward people who say something that they don't like. I'm hoping that that crowd is going to pass me by because I'm not actually that interested in getting into the details of the accusations. They're just really not appropriate for the tone of my show. What I want to talk about more is how do we as parents, teachers, librarians, anyone who gives books to kids, how do we decide what to do in a situation like this? What sort of judgments can we make about the wrongdoings of an author and the way it affects their art and the way that we receive it and teach it to children? We curate books for the children in our lives, and we have a responsibility to think about what message we're sending if we reward awful people with our money and attention. Neil Gaiman's books are mostly for grown-ups, but he has written a bunch of stories for kids. I see 2 of them used in schools pretty often. His fantasy tale Stardust is a common offering in secondary school libraries. Coraline, a children's book about a little girl who has to find her way back home from a parallel universe, is a very common book in elementary and middle school libraries, and I once taught a unit on that book as part of school curriculum. Can you separate the art from the artist? This isn't a new question, and lots of artists have been creeps. Charles Dickens, the author of A Christmas Carol, Great Expectations, and Oliver Twist, was unbelievably cruel to his wife. And Peter Tchaikovsky, the creator of the Nutcracker Ballet, referred to his wife as the creature and forced her to give her children up for adoption. But we still read Dickens novels, and the Nutcracker is the #1 family Christmas entertainment of all time. Each of us has to decide what to do when great art is made by bad, flawed, or complicated people. For me, the misdeeds of guys like Dickens and Tchaikovsky are simpler to deal with because they're dead. They can no longer profit from their work or enjoy being adored by their fans. They can no longer hurt or exploit their victims. This makes it easier for me to say that the art has grown beyond the artist. The art's been integrated into the larger culture. New artists have come and reinterpreted it and made it their own, and the misdeeds are so far in the past that there's some distance there. The farther these things recede into the past, the less likely it is that I could cause pain to a survivor by talking about a book written by an abuser. This makes it easier for me to appreciate works of art without always having to link them to their creators. It's harder for me to separate art from an artist who is still alive and able to profit from his or her work. That brings me back to Neil Gaiman. Stardust and Coraline are very popular kids' books, and it's really common to find them in school libraries, a teacher's classroom bookshelf, or even in a school's official curriculum. Even if Gaiman doesn't end up in jail, the information that's come out about him makes me feel he's not the kind of person I want children to give their time, attention, and admiration. If I were currently teaching, I wouldn't want to teach or promote his work at this point. If I had planned to read Coraline as a class, I would switch to something else if possible. It would be a little extreme and impractical to pull Neil Gaiman's books from school library shelves, but I think maybe it would be in good taste for librarians to not present his books on those display tables of suggested reading until all the facts finish coming out and the book world has a full idea of what kind of guy we're dealing with. Unfortunately, there's enough kids in each school that at least a few of them probably have suffered abuse themselves. And as a temporary measure, I think it's prudent to just avoid putting any books out there that will tell these kids that they don't matter more than a good read. If I had copies of Coraline or Stardust in my classroom library, I would just quietly pull these books and set them aside for now. I don't think Gaiman's books should be destroyed or banned. For now, I feel like a better move is to quarantine them as this sad scandal unfolds. Children who want to read Gaiman's books should still be able to, but they should be the ones to ask for them. I don't really think it's appropriate for grown-ups to promote them, for now. Whether this pause should become permanent will depend on what turns out to be true and false about Gaiman's character and actions. In my own home, I have 2 books by Neil Gaiman. I feel kind of conflicted about them now, but there's no hurry for me to decide what to do with them. So I tucked them away behind the books on my top shelf. I don't have to see them or think about them until I'm ready to do so. I think those of us who curate books for children are better off not making a big stink about what we plan to do. If people loudly announce that they would never teach Gaiman's books or never buy another copy for kids again, this will induce a backfire effect where a bunch of his fans go out and buy 5 copies each. If you find the accusations against Gaiman credible and alarming, you're better off taking a quieter approach. Sometimes the loudest sound is silence. Ignoring books written by someone you want to keep your kids away from can be a lot more powerful than drawing attention to them by talking about what a creep the author is. That isn't to say that parents and teachers shouldn't ever discuss Neil Gaiman, his writing, or this scandal. He's just too big of an author. He is part of literary history, and he's had a huge influence on other authors. But I think the younger a child is, the less they need to know about any of this. The details are too horrific to discuss with little children, and most teenagers won't be interested unless they're already fans of Gaiman's work. A school classroom isn't the right place for this conversation because then you'd be talking about it with everyone, whether or not they needed to get into it. If I were currently teaching and a student asked me what was going on, I would say, several women have made similar accusations about really awful abuse, and this means I'm just going to hold off for now on giving his writing any attention. If the kids want to know more, they can find out at home with the help of parents who understand them better than I do. As parents, teachers, librarians, and book lovers, we have to make little judgments all the time about which books to present to kids and which ones not to present to them. So it's good to think about kind of a framework for how you handle individual situations. Like I said, for me it gets easier to separate the art from the artist when an author is dead and their work is in the public domain. This is because the art usually has become its own thing, with new artists reinterpreting it. Works in the public domain literally and metaphorically don't belong to an artist, although of course we acknowledge them as the creators. A middle ground is where an artist is dead, but his or her work is still under copyright and generating a profit. Depending on what the bad behavior was, who the victims were, and where the royalty money is going to, there are a lot of possible decisions there. It can be difficult to decide what to do with a badly behaved author who's still alive and can still generate fame and fortune from their work. This gets compounded when their stories have been turned into films or TV shows. Both Coraline and Stardust were turned into films. Thousands of people worked on those films, and lots of them count on residual payments for their work. If you bought a DVD a while ago of one of these films, then Neil Gaiman's been paid already, so you just have to decide if these allegations against the writer will ruin your ability to enjoy them. If you stream these movies off a current service, Gaiman is most likely getting some payments, but then so are some other people who did nothing wrong. Deciding how to deal with that is very personal, and there's a lot of opinions that I respect. I'd love to hear from you about how you decide what to do with films like this. Generally, when an author is awful, I do what I can to avoid giving that person any of my time, attention, or money. There are so many books in the world, so I prefer to surround myself with good stories written by decent people. I don't expect anyone to be perfect, and complicated, flawed authors often produce wonderful writing. How do you make decisions when good books are written by bad people? How do you feel about your responsibility to curate books for children? Does the morality of the author play a part in your decision-making? These kinds of questions are not fun to deal with, but they're important because we have a responsibility to think about the books we present to children and the morality that we're implying through our choices. I'd love to hear from you about how you take that responsibility seriously.